Somewhere in the ancient world, a writer described a people who would live in constant conflict with their neighbors and with each other. He described internal divisions, regional wars, a hostility that would never seem to fully resolve. That description was not written last year. It was not written by a political analyst or a historian. It was written thousands of years ago, word for word. It matches today's headlines. What makes this remarkable is not just that the prediction existed, it is that the same ancient text also predicted how this conflict ends, and almost nobody has connected those two things. Until now, every conflict has a starting point. Most people trace this one to 1948, the year the modern state of Israel was established. Others trace it further back, to colonial borders, to land disputes, to religion. But there is a thread that runs deeper than all of those. It begins with one man, one promise, and a decision that split history in two. His name was Abraham. He lived roughly 4,000 years ago in the ancient Near East, and according to three of the world's major religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, he is the common ancestor of both the Jewish and Arab peoples. That is not a metaphor. That is the foundational claim of all three faiths. Abraham received an extraordinary promise that his descendants would become a great nation, that through his lineage, something significant would enter the world. There was only one problem. His wife could not have children. Years passed. The promise seemed impossible. So Abraham's wife made a decision that seemed practical at the time, but would send a fracture through history that is never fully closed. She offered Abraham her servant, a woman named Hagar, so that the promise could be fulfilled through her. Hagar conceived, and a son was born. His name was Ishmael. For 13 years, Ishmael was Abraham's only son, his firstborn, his heir, the living proof that the promise was real. And then, everything changed, because another son was coming, and his arrival would change the course of human history. Before Ishmael was even born, something unusual happened. His mother Hagar, alone, afraid, and fleeing into the wilderness, encountered what the ancient text describes as a divine messenger. And that messenger did not just comfort her. He made a prediction. And he told her that her son would be born, that he would grow, that his descendants would be too numerous to count. But then came words that no one expected. The messenger described the character of this coming child in a way that was specific, detailed, almost uncomfortable in its precision. He would be fiercely independent, untamable, someone whose conflicts would extend in every direction, including inward. Now here is where this becomes extraordinary. Look at the landscape of the Middle East today, not just the conflict between Israel and its neighbors, but the internal divisions within the broader Arab and Muslim world. Scholars and historians have documented deep theological splits that date back centuries, producing some of the most prolonged regional conflicts in recorded history. This is not a political statement. It is an observable historical pattern that researchers, academics, and conflict analysts have studied extensively, and it was described in striking terms in an ancient document written long before any of these modern borders existed. But the prophecy had two sides. The same text that predicted conflict also promised something else entirely: blessing, greatness, influence, a legacy that would stretch across the earth. And history bears that out too. The Arab world produced some of the most advanced civilizations of the medieval period in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and architecture, at a time when much of the rest of the world lagged behind. Both sides of that ancient prediction came true, which raises a question that almost nobody asks. If the conflict was predicted, was the resolution predicted too? While Ishmael was growing up in Abraham's home, something else was happening. God was narrowing the promise, not removing it, not canceling it, but directing it through a specific line. And that direction would become the single most contested spiritual claim in human history. Abraham's wife Sarah, well past the age of childbearing by any natural measure, conceived and gave birth to a son. His name was Isaac. And the moment Isaac arrived, the ancient text made something unmistakably clear. The covenant, the sacred binding agreement between God and Abraham's descendants, would continue specifically through Isaac's line. not Ishmael's. Now, before drawing any conclusion about what that means, it is important to understand what a covenant actually is. It is not simply a promise of land or wealth or military strength. In the ancient world, a covenant was the deepest form of relational commitment that existed. It meant a chosen people, a specific identity, a unique role in a larger story. And that designation, chosen people, became the core of Jewish identity throughout the centuries that followed. It became a source of extraordinary resilience, a thread of continuity that survived exile, persecution, and displacement across thousands of years. But it also became a source of tension, because Ishmael's descendants never forgot what their ancestor had carried first. For 13 years, Ishmael was the heir, the firstborn, the one in whom the future lived. And then, through no action of his own, that identity was redirected. Imagine what that feels like across generations. Now imagine it hardening over centuries into something that goes far deeper than politics. That is exactly what happened next. There was a celebration the day Isaac was weaned, a gathering, a moment of joy in Abraham's camp. But somewhere in that celebration, something happened. The ancient text describes Ishmael mocking his younger brother, a gesture, a moment of contempt, small enough to overlook, significant enough to change everything. Sarah saw it, and her response was immediate. She went to Abraham with a demand that must have felt like a knife to his chest. Send them away, the servant woman and her son. They will not share in this inheritance. The text does not soften what Abraham felt in that moment. It says plainly, this troubled him deeply because of his son, not because of politics, not because of theology, because of love, but he obeyed. The next morning, Abraham rose early. He gave Hagar bread and water, and he sent his firstborn son into the desert. No ceremony, no inheritance, no farewell recorded in the text. Just a father watching his son disappear into the wilderness. Now here is where the ancient story and the modern world collide with startling precision. In 1948, when the modern state of Israel was established, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Arabs were displaced from their homes. To this day, many in the Arab world refer to that event as the Nakba, an Arabic word meaning catastrophe. The parallel is not a theological argument. It is a human one. A people who believed a land was their inheritance, watching that identity being redirected again. Whether one agrees with that perspective or not, the emotional and historical echo is undeniable. He used the wound that began in the desert 4,000 years ago never fully closed. It simply changed its address, and the place it moved to, is the most contested piece of land on earth. There is a hill in Jerusalem. It covers less than 37 acres of land, and it may be the single most contested piece of real estate in human history. It is called the Temple Mount by Jews, Al-Haram al-Sharif, the Noble Sanctuary, by Muslims. Same hill, same stones, two names, two histories, two claims that both stretch back thousands of years. For Jewish people, this site represents the spiritual center of their entire faith. Ancient historical records and archaeological findings document that two successive temples once stood on this ground. The first destroyed by the Babylonians, the second by the Romans in 70 AD. What remains today is a retaining wall from that second temple complex. Jews have faced that wall in prayer for nearly 2,000 years. For Muslims, the same location holds profound significance. Islamic tradition holds that the Prophet Muhammad was transported to Jerusalem during a night journey, an event documented in the Quran, and that this site was the point of ascension to heaven. Two of Islam's most historically significant mosques stand on this hill today. Same ground, completely different stories built on top of each other. This is not simply a land dispute. It is a battle over which version of history gets to stand, which son's story becomes the official record, Isaac's or Ishmael's, and that battle, fought for centuries through theology, architecture, and conflict, has never produced a winner. Because the deeper the roots of a conflict, the harder it is to resolve at the surface. Politicians have tried for decades. Treaties have been signed. Borders have been drawn. Agreements have been celebrated. And still, the hill remains disputed, which raises the question that every historian, theologian, and peacemaker eventually arrives at. Is there something that politics simply cannot fix? After everything that happened between them, the displacement, the inheritance, the decades of silence, the ancient text records one final moment where Isaac and Ishmael appear in the same place at the same time. Their father Abraham had died, and both sons came to bury him. No conflict is recorded in that moment. No argument over who stood where. No dispute over who had the greater right to mourn. Just two sons standing together on over their father's grave. Now here is a detail that scholars of Jewish tradition have found deeply significant. In the ancient text, when the names of the two brothers are listed at that burial, Isaac is named first. Ishmael was the elder. By tradition and by culture, the firstborn's name should appear first, but it doesn't. And according to certain rabbinical interpretations, this was not an accident. It was a gesture. Ishmael, the elder brother, yielding in that moment to Isaac, acknowledging something he had contested for a lifetime. Some scholars interpret this as the text's quiet signal, a prophetic whisper that reconciliation, however difficult, is not impossible, that the children of Abraham are capable of standing together, even after everything. Now fast forward roughly 4,000 years. In September 2020, when something happened that most observers considered historically unthinkable. The United Arab Emirates and Bahrain signed formal agreements normalizing diplomatic relations with Israel. Morocco and Sudan followed shortly after. These were not minor diplomatic gestures. They represented a fundamental shift in how several Arab nations chose to position themselves in relation to the Jewish state. And the name chosen for these agreements is perhaps the most revealing detail of all. They were called the Abraham Accords, not named after a political framework, not named after a president or a prime minister, named after the common father of both peoples. It was a deliberate acknowledgement by modern governments that the origin of this relationship was never purely political. It was always familial. Humans and families, even the most fractured ones, sometimes find their way back to each other. But here is what almost nobody discussed when those accords were signed. The ancient text does not end at the burial scene. There is something beyond reconciliation in the story, something that the political world has no framework to explain. And it may be the most important part of this entire narrative. Politics can draw borders. Treaties can normalize relations. Diplomacy can bring leaders to the same table. But none of those things have ever reached the place where this conflict actually lives. Because this conflict was never primarily about land. It was about identity, inheritance, and a wound that runs so deep, it has outlasted every empire that has ever tried to resolve it. So what does the ancient text offer beyond the burial scene? Something unexpected, something that neither side of this conflict has fully reckoned with. There is a concept woven through the later portions of the biblical narrative, picked up and developed explicitly by the Apostle Paul in the first century, that proposes something radical, not a political solution, not a military solution, a third category entirely. The idea is this, that the division between Isaac and Ishmael, between Jew and Arab, was never meant to be the final word on human identity, that there was always a larger story being written, one that neither brother could see from where he stood. Paul described it in terms that were remarkable for his time and remain remarkable now, that a new kind of human community was possible, one where the old lines of inheritance and identity did not disappear, but were no longer the defining source of division, where the question was no longer which son carried the covenant, but whether both sons could be gathered into something neither of them built. Now here is where this becomes something worth sitting with, because scattered across the Middle East today, in places that rarely make international headlines, there are communities, small ones, made up of both Jewish and Arab believers, living together, worshiping together, in the middle of one of the most divided regions on earth. They are not making political statements. They are simply living as though the third way is already real. Whether that is the beginning of something or simply an anomaly in an otherwise unresolvable conflict depends entirely on what happens next. And what happens next was also written down thousands of years ago in the same text where this story began.